Hello guys, welcome to my channel Lucid Fanfic, and if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest videos. So be sure to stick around until the end, and let's get started. Third POV. Izuku Midoriya at the age of 24 knew that the world was unfair. It was unfair that his mother had to die. It was unfair that his father started to fall apart, and he was unable to put him back together. Izuku would blame himself for the rest of all time for the amount of death and destruction that would follow his father's footsteps. However, he would keep pushing forward. There were many things he needed to do and many things that needed to be completed. Izuku was moving through the dark city heading towards the warehouse he agreed to meet at. The city was plagued by darkness due to the power generators having been damaged, and no one could repair them due to the chaos. As such, people had to resort to candles and firewood to light the night, or keep themselves warm via other means. It felt like the world had fallen back into the Stone Age for some parts of the country, and Izuku wished that the chaos would come to an end quickly, but he knew that was going to be impossible. Izuku arrived at the warehouse and looked around, and then saw in the depths of the warehouse were the people he was here to meet. He headed over to them, and when he was only a handful of feet away they noticed him come up since he had gotten so good in his training. Izuku had been training himself to go undetected in his movements, and he's just been getting better and better at it as time was passing. That is what war does to you after all. It forces you to evolve and adapt. Good to see you, nephew, stated a man with white hair. Izuku smiled and nodded his head. Good to see you as well, uncle. How have you all been? Izuku asked the man who was his uncle. This man was Kenneth Shigaraki, aka his father's brother. We've been good as we can be for the past 2 years. I see you have been enjoying your outfit you put together. Did you really have to base it off a game, though? Asked Kenneth. Izuku just chuckled and said he had to. He was planning to go into the shadows when he operated most of the time, so it helped him blend in with the darkness and help keep his identity a secret. The outfit was great, but it also had some green like Izuku's hair, but not as dark as his. The outfit also had arm coverings that had hidden blades in them. Izuku could trigger the 2 blades to come out, and he could use it to stab people or cut them. Izuku's uncle and his associates just rolled their eyes at Izuku. They all knew though Izuku was right, and Izuku had become quite skillful. Izuku was hated by all for one, or otherwise known as Hisashi Midoriya, because he would keep breaking into all for one bases and laying waste to them all. It's undeniable that without Izuku they would have faced a lot more troubles than they have been. Now you might be wondering why Izuku was breaking into his own father's bases. Well, simple really. Izuku was opposing his father's plans of conquering Japan. They were currently living in what they call the dawn of quirks or superpowers. Fantasy was becoming reality as people were being born or awaking quirks and were causing chaos or using them to better their lives or others. However, with all different things and changes there comes problems. One problem was that people had discriminated against those with quirks, and some were even trying to kill those with quirks. This didn't represent the majority of the population, but there was enough that it caused a problem, and fighting between the 2 sides broke out. Soon though things turned for the worst when Izuku Midoriya's mother died at his age of 24. This made his father start falling from his initial plans that were filled with good and great things. Instead, he started to use his quirk for his own personal goals that were born out of Izuku's mother's death. Hisashi Midoriya quirk was called All for One, and it allowed him to take, give, or combine quirks as he willed. Now at the start people went to him to offer their quirks so they would be quirkless again or to trade quirks because they gained quirks that were troublesome to use or caused them problems, but after Inko's death things turned and he started taking quirks from anyone that opposed him. He also gave quirks to those that stood at his side and helped him gain power, which he was slowly doing so. However, there was a resistance force that was opposing him, and after 2 years they were getting recognition from the government and getting support from them. They have deemed All for One as a threat because he was gaining power fast, and they were occupied with stopping everyone else from tearing the country apart that they couldn't devote themselves 24/7 to stopping All for One. As such, Izuku, his uncle, and the other associates had gathered together and were going to go to the government office to receive the first hero license, as they were called. The government passed a new law authorizing quirk use only for hero officials or those that have licenses for it that were issued by the government. After some walking, they soon arrived at the office and started to register themselves into their new positions. Sir, I would like to be registered a bit different, Izuku asked the main government official that was put in charge of the heroes. He was the president of the Hero Commission. The president of the commission how he wanted to be registered differently, and Izuku explained. The law only states heroes as the legal term to be used in reference to heroes and their activities. It does leave everything else to you and the commission to decide upon and how to structure the laws in regards to heroes and their regulations. So I would like you to create a new field of the hero title, and it would be called Underground Heroics, or otherwise could be called an underground hero. I have no attention to acting in the public eye for the most part, and will keep doing what I've been doing where I attack their bases at night and do night operations. That is why I want to call it Underground Heroics, and in this field, you would limit all my information from public access since I don't plan to let people know who I am nor receive much public recognition. Most people would know my hero name and outfit, but not my real face or name. Izuku explained. The president was looking thoughtful and was silent. After a few minutes of thinking, he nodded his head and agreed. As such, the Underground Heroics field was born at the same time as Daylight Heroics. Izuku became the first underground hero with his registration number being 01 for the first underground hero. His hero name was Shadow due to how he operates in the night, and no one but those close to him knows of his face except the president of the commission. They all registered their quirks. Izuku's uncle registered his quirk as a strength enhancement since that is what they knew it did. All for One called it a stockpiling quirk when he had forced it on Izuku's uncle, but they only saw that it stockpiled strength, so they went with the strength enchanter name. Izuku remembers the day that his uncle gained his quirk from his father, since it always haunted his dreams when he heard his uncle screaming as the quirk was forced into him. Izuku knew at that moment that his uncle also had a quirk already since people don't go through that much pain unless they had a quirk already or their quirks were being pulled out of them. If a quirkless person was given a quirk it hurt, but it didn't hurt that much. It was more their body was being pricked non-stop, but it was something people could endure from the few tests that Izuku conducted with some members of their group who were quirkless. As such, Izuku's uncle had a quirk beforehand that had activated when All for One forced a second quirk into his body, but Izuku didn't know what it did. It wasn't activated before the new quirk came into his body and had merged with the old one, creating an entire new quirk. That is why they only registered it as Strength Enchantment, since they only knew it did that currently and nothing more. Izuku was glad that he was able to get his uncle away from his father that day, but the face his father made when Izuku chooses his uncle's side always hurt Izuku. It wasn't that he didn't still love his father, it's just that his father was committing so many bad actions that Izuku felt compelled to oppose him and stop his actions from continuing. As such, he joined his uncle in starting a resistance force against his father and would keep the fight going on for years to come. Though his father's face would always be a constant memory for Izuku. Though snapping out of his thoughts, Izuku noticed his uncle had finished registering his quirk. The others all registered their quirks as well, and soon it was Izuku's time. Izuku registered his quirk, but not the full quirk since he didn't want the government to get any ideas. He registered it as Enhanced Copy, which he wrote down that it could grant him a copy of someone's quirk for several days if he trains with it enough. However, in truth, it was an enhanced version of his father's quirk. He was able to copy other people's quirks without taking them. He could take, give, copy, and combine quirks as he wished. He was also able to take quirks without touching people, but had to be within 6 feet of them for it to work, and it took longer for him to copy instead of touching them. However, if he touched someone to copy it, then it caused pain, just like his father's did when he stole them. Izuku's did that if he stole it as well, but when he is copying them from a distance it slows down the process, which causes the people to have a feeling of a prickly sensation like someone is poking them with a needle. Most people ignore it and assume they just got a rock or something agitating their skin, so Izuku could copy quirks just sitting at a table and no one would ever know. Soon they finished the registration process and their group became the first heroes of Japan and of the world since Japan was the first to introduce the system, but there was the word that other countries were following suit. Now Izuku and the group could show their licenses if they ever get stopped by police or other law enforcement, and they have to let them go unless they were being arrested for some crime. Izuku and the group soon went back to the warehouse to talk and do some planning. What were they planning, you might ask? Well, from recent information they gathered, there was a large protest that was set to happen on the main street of Tokyo near the Diet in about half a year. Overall, a protest there wouldn't be a problem, but this time around it was. The problem with this protest was that it is going to be led by none other than Hisashi Midoriya, aka All for One. All for One didn't do things for no reason. Every single thing he did, from minimal tasks to large protests, had its reason for happening. As such, they knew he had a reason for the protest to be going on where it was, and at the time it was. They were suspecting that it was going to be a planned gathering to try and take control of the Diet building and hold the members hostage to try and force the government to submit, but they didn't have much information about that as his course of actions. However, they would later learn that it wasn't the plan at all, but something that would cause so many problems and give him a chance to gain so much power. Also, there was the issue that until people used their quirks publicly, they didn't have reason to hold them for arrest, so the protest had to go on since there was no legal reason to stop it, but the group of heroes would be around watching it. A few days before the protest, and everyone was tense. They have figured out why the Quirk protest was going on at that location. The group had learned that there is now a large anti-Quirk protest going on as well, and now they are scared that the two groups will end up clashing, which will trigger riots all across the country. The reason for this is because the two protests that were going on had projected large numbers of people that would be on both sides. As such, everyone was tense due to the tension between the two sides that have been building up as of late. Though the government had managed to calm people down from the small riots that were going on before now. However, there was fear that this large protest could turn violent, which would spark the kegs, so to speak, and set the fragile peace on fire, which would set off all of the other groups around the country. If that happened, it would allow All for One to seize control of a lot of the other quirked groups, or those supporting quirked rights, which were the government's and Izuku's fear. As such, Izuku had been going to bars lately and copying any quirks he could from quirked individuals. The problem was that a lot of the quirks didn't have much combat use. For example, one quirk that Izuku had gained via this method could change his hair color and another his eye color. Those were neat and good for some undercover work, but for combat, they didn't do much good. He was in the middle of violent fights to the death, and he really needed more quirks that could be used for battle and not underground heroics. Izuku had several hundred quirks, and not every one of them had combat use, which he needed to focus on right now due to the battles. Izuku sighed as he came out of his thoughts. Izuku was currently sitting in a warehouse that belonged to their group. Izuku has been buying up a large amount of property since they started to get payment from the government. For each criminal they captured, they were paired based on the crime, damage it took to capture the criminal, damage to other individuals, and how long the case took. Each factor could increase or decrease the pay, but overall they were being paid nicely since the group was combating and arresting a lot of people that was causing chaos. Only a few more people have been given their hero licenses as well, since the government wanted to ensure no one had ultra motives against them, like being a part of All for One's group. Izuku and the others were easily allowed since they have been opposing All for One from the start. As such, the pay they received was quite well since there were a few of them and a large number of people to catch. With that money, Izuku has been investing, buying properties, and setting up hidden locations around Japan for future needs if his father was able to somehow take control of the government. They would need some hidden places to hide away and regroup for future attacks and plans. Soon, though, the day of the protest had arrived, and things went south in all the ways it could. This day would become known as the flashpoint for what would be called the Quirk riots. Izuku wishes things could have gone differently on this day, but it seems fate wanted it to end as it had ended, and it would set the stage for many things in the future and would also be the start of his cursed life, but it would also be the start of the dark periods for Japan. Third POV. It was the day. The day of the protests had arrived, and everyone was tense. They had warned the government of what they believed All for One was planning and aiming for, so the government could start preparing itself. The government did all it could, but by the time that Izuku and the others learned of his plans and alerted the government, they wouldn't have much time to get a large number of forces on site in time. They could only move the local forces around and get a large group ready. The National Assembly was evacuated ahead of the protests in anticipation, so they couldn't be held hostage. It would be sad if the building got taken over or destroyed, but human life was valued over the building, which could be rebuilt. They had all the local forces they could gather, which wasn't much due to how thin everyone was spread out due to all of the small fights that had been going on. The forces were being recalled quickly, and the little force they had on site was geared up and ready to go. Izuku and the group of heroes he belonged to with his uncle were on buildings near the site waiting for something to happen. They would not be showing themselves until anything happened, so that All for One didn't know where they were at. The element of surprise was everything in regards to dealing with All for One. It was how Izuku did so much damage to his father's operations all this time. Izuku would get information on different locations and scout them out before hitting them when they were most vulnerable and destroy anything he could and leave without getting seen most of the time. He did remember hearing about one of the luckiest one time about how pissed he was with the hero known as Shadow. It was funny, and Izuku felt like a little kid again as he sneaked into his father's office. This time, though, it was sneaking in the warehouses and blowing them up instead of just stealing some paper or materials to draw on. Izuku sighed as he just watched the protest happen. His uncle came over to him and started to talk. "How are you doing, Izuku?" asked his uncle. Izuku looked at him and shrugged his shoulders. "Doing as best as I can. My father hates Shadow, which is me. I know I'm his enemy right now, but still being hated by him hurts since he is still my father," Izuku said behind his mask. Though Izuku's uncle could tell via the tone of his voice that Izuku was sad about the facts he just spoke. He himself was sad as well, but there wasn't anything they could do about it since All for One had to be stopped. They both wondered if their family member could have been turned off this path if they acted somehow differently, but they would never know. As they sat there on the roof, they could see the two opposing protests getting closer and closer to each other. They also noticed All for One had arrived, and he was making his way to the middle of his side of the protest. "Everyone, you should get ready because this will likely blow the moment both sides get within feet of each other," Izuku stated, and they all checked their gear one more time and stretched themselves. Izuku was right, as within 5 minutes of the two groups meeting near the center of the protest area, someone threw the first punch, and it spiraled out of control as projectiles and quirks were being used. Izuku looked over and his face turned into a frown because he saw his father standing in the middle of his area, smirking at the fight. Their fears were true, and he was going to use this to set the country up in flames and gain control of all the pro-quirked factions. Once he had control of them, it was going to be only a matter of time before All for One pushed forward and tried to overthrow the government itself and install himself as an emperor or king. Once he stabilized Japan, he could work on other countries, but then he would have an entire nation under his control, including its military power, which right now was spread thin across the entire nation, dealing with threats and possible foreign involvement. Izuku did not like where this was all going at all. Soon they saw the police moving in and trying to make a wall between both sides and Izuku, and the group moved in at that point and started to take on quirk users that were illegally using their quirk. They had some cuffs, but most couldn't keep some quirk users detained due to some of the quirks the criminals had. Izuku was moving fast and was sliding in and out of the crowded area, using his stealth skills plus a few of the quirks he copied from other people. One quirk, in particular, allowed him to mask his presence but not his sounds. So using the skills he had trained to steady his breathing and sense his movements, he used the stealth quirk and just moved through the group, going undetected since the quirk made people not realize he was there even if he was right in front of them. Doing this, he would get up to a quirk user and use his hidden blades to make cuts on the back of their legs that prevented them from easily standing without being in great pain. He didn't hit any main vessels or cut the muscles deeply. He just did it enough that they could move, but under a lot of pain. This forced others to pull the downed individuals back away from the front lines and caused multiple people to be removed from the fight, instead of just killing a person straight up. Though Izuku does admit to the fact that he has had to kill sadly in these years that he separated from his father. As Izuku was working, he noticed his father had made the visual sight of his uncle, and Izuku decided to get in his path. His uncle had nowhere near the strength that he would need to take on All for One, unlike Izuku does. Izuku has a range of quirks that he has built for his underground persona that can't be seen by the naked eye. They give him increased reaction times, increased speed, increased strength, increased everything for the most part. None of them were mutations either, so no one could tell he had a quirk. There was also the issue that All for One would assume that Izuku or whoever was behind the mask was quirkless. Izuku had a good theory that his father couldn't sense a quirk in Izuku, like how Izuku couldn't sense a quirk in his father. It was as if the two All for One quirk canceled each other out and couldn't be used on each other. That is what Izuku had wanted to do one day, but he noticed when he looked that day that his father didn't appear to have quirks in him, so he came to the theory that the quirks blocked each other from being seen by the other side. As such, All For One wouldn't think that all of Izuku's abilities came from a quirk, but his natural abilities, which would be extremely hard to do, but not impossible. As All For One got closer and the crowds got more and more violent, Izuku soon arrived in front of his path, but he hadn't noticed Izuku yet due to the quirk. When he was near, he dropped the quirk as he was in a position to attack, which scared All For One since he just noticed someone that looked as if they appeared out of nowhere. Izuku charged at his father and started the fight. Though All For One noticed the mask and outfit and realized that this individual fighting him matched the description from his men that had the few visual sighting of Shadow. "It's you. Shadow, you have a lot of courage appearing in front of me knowing how pissed I am with you." All For One yelled and started to fight back against Izuku. The fight was large and forced a lot of other people out of the area and made some retreat. All For One was wanting to get rid of the so-called bug that had been giving him so many headaches. However, he wouldn't realize how much he would come to regret it until after. It was too late. As they were fighting, Izuku's uncle was off fighting in a different area and was trying to get control of people in their area when he heard it. A gunshot went off, and he looked to where it came from and saw one of the anti-quirk rioters holding a gun. The man was shaking, but Kenneth Shigaraki followed the barrel of the gun into the direction that the shot would have gone, and then he saw it. He saw the bloody spot under his nephew as he was the one that got shot. He then saw his nephew and brother stop as they look at what happened. Izuku reached down and touched where he got shot and lifted his hand up to see that it was covered in blood. However, the tragedy wasn't done yet. Kenneth Shigaraki stood there in shock as he heard the words leave his brother's mouth. It felt like an eternity as he heard and saw what happened next as his heart broke. Ironic, isn't it, Shadow? The people you were trying to protect and help just shot you. No matter, it just makes this easier to do. All For One said as he ran his hand into the chest area where Izuku's heart was and pulled out, leaving his hand covered in blood. He had used a quirk to sharpen the tip of his hand so he could stab into Izuku. Izuku then fell to his knees as Kenneth screamed. All For One looked up and smirked. Kenneth slowly moved over and tried to talk. All For One just looked at his brother in pity, unknown to what he had just done himself. What did you do, brother? You went down this path due to Inko being killed, but now you killed your own son. Kenneth asked as he screamed and looked up to Hisashi Midoriya. Now you might be wondering why the different last names. Well, Hisashi was so in love with Inko, he had taken her name when they got married instead of her taking his name. Now Hisashi Midoriya's face turned into shock and confusion. He didn't understand in his mind what his brother had just said. Then they both saw the arm of Shadow move and the mask being moved off his face. That is when it hit Hisashi. He had just stabbed his son in the chest, tearing up his heart, which meant there was no way to save him. Hisashi had only minor regeneration quirks currently, and none of them could repair a heart. They were for small wounds and cuts. They were nowhere near powerful enough to transfer to his son to heal a torn heart. "Dad," Izuku coughed out blood as he spoke. Hisashi leaned down to his son and leaned right next to his brother. "Yes, son?" Hisashi asked as a tear fell down his face and onto Izuku's. Do you hate me?" Izuku coughed out. Hisashi's eyes widened. "No, I don't hate you. I could never hate you. It doesn't matter how many things of mine you steal or destroy. I could never hate you, my sweet boy. Banish that thought out of your mind," Hisashi said. Kenneth just sat there in tears as he watched his nephew die. Another family member will be gone now, and now he wondered how his brother was going to act after losing his son. Kenneth shuddered at the thought and had a good idea of what was going to happen. "Go good. I'm sorry. Smile, please," Izuku asked, and Hisashi agreed and gave his son a warm smile as he placed a kiss on his forehead. After a few more moments, Izuku succumbed to his wounds and died. It was silent between Hisashi and Kenneth. Kenneth picked Izuku's body up since he would ensure it got buried at the gravesite next to Inko. Hisashi looked at him, and Kenneth spoke up. "I'll ensure he's buried by Inko. Brother, stop this. You can stop this. It's not too late," Kenneth pleaded with tears down his face. Hisashi looked up to him and put the mask from the ground onto Izuku's face. He then spoke. "The moment they pulled that trigger on my wife, it sent me down this path. They killed her due to having a quirk. Now they killed my son once again, and he was fighting for them and protecting them. Now, it's far too late. I will tear them down. Hisashi said in anger. He then calmed down a bit. Hisashi refused to fight his brother here, not here where his son had just died. Not with his son in his brother's arms. Go, brother. The next time we meet we might kill each other, because as long as you stand on the side that has killed my family, I will not stay my hand in regards to your life. I'm already a broken man. It's far too late for me now, because I won't stop until Quirk people are no longer hated. I won't stop until we have to fear for our lives. It's time for the old rulers to be removed and new leadership to come. Hisashi said as he turned away from his brother. I'll visit their graves every year on their days of death, so let's agree not to come after each other on those days. Hisashi asked as he faced away from his brother. Kenneth could only agree for himself and no one else. I promise not to tell the government of that fact. I won't attack you there, but I can't say the same if others discovered you there. Kenneth said, and Hisashi nodded his head and walked away with tears down his face. The riots were still going on, and they only were getting worse. As Kenneth retreated, he saw that the police had been pushed back and out, and the fighting had turned deadly in a lot of spots. They had failed to stop the bloodshed, and now Japan will fall into chaos for a long period of time. The other heroes arrived at his spot and saw Izuku's body and broke down in tears. They had all grown attached to Izuku and asked for what happened. Kenneth explained that an anti-Quirk user shot him as he was fighting All for One, which gave All for One the chance to finish the job. All for One discovered that it was his son and broke down. His rage has only grown. He blames the anti-Quirk side and government for Inko Nadizuka's death, and he's not 100% wrong, but nor is he 100% right either. Just know that this fighting won't end anytime soon. Though it's time to take Izuku to the president, so he can be cleaned up for being buried, Kenneth said. As such, everyone stopped talking and made their way to the commission's president's location, and the president was devastated to hear of Shadow's death. He took possession of the body and said he would get people working on his body as the law requires before it gets taken for burial. He did say it would be a closed funeral since others would likely attend, and Izuku was always clear on keeping his face hidden. Kenneth turned the body over, and after a few moments of standing and watching his nephew's body, he moved away and went to one of the warehouses. Izuku's body was taken to be worked on. However, what they all didn't realize was that Izuku Midoriya had taken several hundred quirks, though most of them were from recent times, as he had been building of his strength. Before now, he had no real need to copy any quirk. He could, as such he didn't do it often. There was also the fact that not much was known about quirks either, since they were such a new thing. As such, each one required so much testing to find small details about them out, or any details out. One quirk in particular interested Izuku one day, though, before the fighting even started. He was sitting in a restaurant one day when he noticed an unusual quirk inside of an older male. It didn't have much information to go on by the looks or feeling of it, so Izuku copied it. If he didn't like it, he could destroy it later. As such, he took it and had been studying it for as long as he could, but the problem was he couldn't get it to activate, and the fighting had also started, so he didn't have the time to waste. Then Izuku had an idea that it might require certain conditions to work, so he just left it alone as the fighting had started. That is how one Izuku Midoriya discovered the activation requirements of the quirk without even realizing it. This quirk was an immortality quirk called Rebirth. How does he know that? Well, it requires the user to get killed and not die of natural causes like old age. As such, one Izuku Midoriya, aka the underground hero Shadow, woke up inside the morgue with the president of the commission in the room, finishing the paperwork for his burial. The president and morgue doctor were both shocked and confused about what they were seeing and thought they were in a dream. Well, that was until Izuku started to talk and asked where he was at. Then the doctor fell to the ground, and the president choked on the air he was breathing and was trying not to die. Third POV. The commission's president finally stopped choking and was able to get a drink of water and clear his throat. He looked at the doctor, who was still out of it, but ignored that for the bigger issue. The issue of a dead person now being alive. So mind telling me how you are alive when you were clearly dead? Asked the president. Izuku then started to remember everything that happened, and his eyes widened in disbelief. I remember getting shot by one of the anti-Quirk people, and then my father stabbing me in the heart. He discovered who I was under the mask. He thinks I'm dead now and that he finished the job, Izuku said as he had tears going down his face. The president got him some tissues as he pulled a chair up next to Izuku and sat down while still ignoring the doctor. I know that part. The problem is your quirk only allows you to copy quirks. Did you have some regeneration quirk copied? Even with that, your heart stopped fully, so it shouldn't have been working, stated the president. Izuku looked confused since he knew he didn't have any regeneration quirks. I didn't copy any regeneration quirks. Let me see what I have copied currently, Izuku said as he closed his eyes and focused and felt around the hundreds of quirks. Then he found it. He found the quirk that he had no idea what it was. But there was something different. It looks like it's merged into his main quirk now, though, as if they are tied together. He tried to separate them, but it wouldn't move as he could do with other quirks. I can't move it around or manipulate it like the other ones currently. It will require further tests, but since it's activated, I can feel more information off of it, Izuku thought, and then his eyes came open and widened at what he found. You find it? The president asked, and Izuku shook his head no. This confused the president until Izuku explained. I don't have any regeneration quirks currently on hand. I did copy an unknown quirk that I was trying to figure out what it was. I seem to have found out what it can do now, though it's an immortality quirk, and it's called Rebirth, and it's merged with my main one, meaning it's permanently inside of myself now, but tied to my main quirk, Izuku stated, and the president's eyes widened at that. He was in disbelief. He was just told that one of his friends that he got close to from the hero group was now immortal. How the hell does that happen? Do you remember who you got it from? We don't need more immortals walking around, and if your father gets his hands on it, we're screwed, stated the president. Izuku shook his head. The only thing I remember was it belonged to a very old man. He was also on an oxygen tank as well. From what I see in the quirk details, it requires you to die of unnatural causes like being murdered. So if the man dies due to natural causes, the quirk won't activate. It will just sit in his body undiscovered, and my father would have no way of finding him or knowing about it as long as neither of us talks about it, Izuku said. The president nodded his head. I guess I should call your uncle, stated the president, but Izuku stopped him. Don't my father and uncle both believe I'm dead, and it should stay that way. If I come back, my father could try coming for the quirk. Instead, I have different plans, Izuku said as he explained what he wanted to do. The president sat there and listened to what Izuku wanted to do. It was crazy, but in the long term, it could help them overall. As such, he agreed to it, and they got to work. Izuku told the president the truth about his quirk since he was a good friend of Izuku, and the president just grunted at the complex problems Izuku was causing for him. The president agreed to make his hero license valid forever. No matter who the new president of the commission was in the future, they could not deactivate his license without the approval of the entire diet, and this meant the entire diet. Even if one member voted against it, then the measure failed. This was established as a primary law on the books that was buried deeply in a lot of other languages, but it was still valid law, and it was one of the main set of laws that couldn't be changed without the entire diet approval. This meant that Izuku would have his hero license for his entire immortal life, and it could never be revoked from him without diet approval, nor did Izuku have to expose his identity per another law that the president put in regarding anyone with a hero licenses that was from the serial codes 100 and below, which included Izuku's. The president got Izuku in touch with a large number of trainers and combat specialists to help Izuku increase his skills over time. The goal was to make Izuku an unstoppable, immortal one-man army that the government could rely on in any and all situations. The incoming prime minister of the government would be informed of Izuku's existence and would be given a special number to call. They would be warned that they shouldn't abuse it and should only call when situations looked dire or other heroes couldn't handle it. This way, Izuku wouldn't be running around all the time doing anything and everything, but doing only more important work when the government really needed it. Izuku also decided to start copying any and every quirk he came across, and would get rid of the ones that had no useful means. Though he knew that he would hardly ever got rid of any since he could find a use for almost any and all quirks. Izuku also had all of his assets transferred several times into a new name that he could control via proxy, and just kept having the assets set up to transfer to his new name each time he changed identity. The president helped Izuku set all of this up so it wouldn't get tracked easily. Izuku also used his range of quirks to change his hair and eye colors. He also changed his hairstyle up and wore a medical mask most of the time to hide his face. All of this was set up or started within weeks of Izuku's supposed death. Izuku was glad he was close friends with the president of the commission since it made things so much easier moving forward in the future. Izuku was planning to still go out as Shadow, as more of a ghost to bug his father. He didn't mean to rub it in his face, but having someone wear the Shadow outfit would enrage his father and make him cause mistakes that people could track and lead him to get caught. Though Izuku knew that he would have to fake his death after a period of time as Shadow, so his father didn't get suspicious of a new Shadow person that kept appearing to face him if he ended up suffering fatal wounds in battle. Though Izuku knew he could use it for other matters that didn't involve his father, Izuku would have to be careful moving forward in his actions. It was now time for the funeral, and Izuku stay far away from it and use some binoculars to watch the funeral so his father nor uncle could have the chance at identifying him. As he was watching the funeral, he saw them both appear, but at different times. His uncle came at the start and left when it was finished, and his father had appeared roughly a few minutes after his uncle left. The president was now standing with Izuku watching from a distance. I'm a bit surprised that he showed on the first day and not a few days later. It's risky of him, stated the president. Izuku shook his head, which confused him. My uncle wouldn't tell the government, even if he showed up during the funeral. I'm betting they reached an agreement that my and Mom's grave sites are neutral grounds between them, so the graveyard isn't disturbed. It's not surprising between those two since my father had no intention of killing me. At most he would have locked me away so I couldn't oppose him. He has fallen further down his path, most likely due to me being shot by the anti-Quirk protesters. In his mind, he likely sees them responsible for my and my mother's death, since it was an anti-Quirk user that had killed my mother in the first place, since she wasn't shy about talking about her quirk. Izuku stated. The president was stunned silent for a few moments before he nodded his head and said he understood. He also agreed not to let others know of the gravesite area as a neutral ground, so people wouldn't try to get him here. This war isn't going to end anytime soon, is it? Asked the president. Izuku shook his head. No, it won't. There is already a large number of riots breaking out across the country due to the deadly collision of both sides at the National Assembly building. The media only made the fire bigger as they reported about how Shadow, which worked for the government, got shot by an anti-Quirk protester. I'm not going to be surprised if those media outlets have quirked owners or someone powerful enough to influence them for those headlines. We are going to be fighting this war for years before someone wins. Izuku stated, and the president knew that it was the truth. The government itself was already preparing for the likelihood of it being overthrown, and they were setting up secret spots to have strongholds of the old government survive in until they could retake control. Izuku sighed as the funeral had come to an end. It was weird attending his own funeral, even though he did it from a distance. However, now it was only a matter of pushing forward and doing everything that he could to help keep this war under control as best as they could. Both the president and Izuku left to the government facility that Izuku would start his training at. They would also be meeting the current prime minister there as well. As such, after about 40 minutes they arrived on site. This is one of the strongholds that the government is setting up for the possibility of them being overthrown. It's to ensure they have a chance to retake control if All for One gets pushed back somehow, if he did gain control, stated a voice from the side of Izuku and the president. They turned around and saw the Prime Minister of Japan. Prime Minister, Izuku said as he bowed to the leader of Japan. Then they saw slightly behind him was the Japanese Emperor. Izuku and the President of the Commission bowed even more than they did for the Prime Minister. The Japanese Emperor doesn't have any real political power, but he is still seen as important in their country due to many reasons. The Emperor tends to broker peace between disputes in the Diet when things get too chaotic, and he does other things for the country as well, so the position, even though it's a puppet head, is still a highly respected position. Rise, you two, the Emperor stated, and they did. Soon they entered the compound, and they all sat down after the Emperor. So you are the immortal hero that will be helping our nation. It's a pleasure to meet you, Immortal One, stated the Emperor with a bow. Izuku was quick to stop him from bowing. Soon they got to talking about plans and ideas on how to stop All for One. Overall, the only thing they could really do was just prepare and fight. Due to all of the quirks that All for One was getting, he was a tough opponent to take head-on. He was also smart and only showed himself for important things. One of the things I will be focused on is tracking his location down. However, from what I gathered before with the hero group, is that he tends to change locations. He got pissy when I destroyed his previous bases and figured out that I was after him. All I can do is keep it up and waste his resources and force him to redirect some of his forces to deal with me," Izuku stated. They all nodded their heads. As the meeting went on, the Emperor spoke up about a separate matter. "Young Immortal, these times have called for unusual measures. As such, some of my power as the Emperor was restored by the National Diet. One of those powers allows me to create a special unit of agents. They are called the Shadow Guards, and they are responsible for the royal family's safety and doing missions for the royal family. The Shadow Guards also have authority over heroes themselves and acts outside of the Commission's authority. This would allow you to report directly to the royal family without having to worry about the Commission going corrupt in the distant future. The only requirement is that you show yourself to each new emperor and show your original appearance to the new emperors before you change back into whatever new look you would be using. This is to ensure that they can validate that it's you before relying on you. A portrait would also be kept of your original appearance with the royal family's eyes only. Are you willing to accept the responsibilities of becoming our main shadow guard?" asked the Emperor. Izuku and the president of the commission were both shocked. They were shocked since this was the first time hearing about the Emperor gaining more power, but it was honestly understandable due to the recent times. Izuku thought for a few minutes, but agreed nonetheless. The Emperor was happy and provided Izuku the badge that identified him as the main shadow guard. They also made a portrait of Izuku's original appearance in a scroll that the Emperor would keep on him and secure away later on. The president of the commission, Izuku's friend, then whispered into Izuku's ear that it might be wise to tell the Emperor, but not the prime minister, of Izuku's true quirk. Izuku agreed since the Emperor was granting him such power. Izuku more or less reported to only the Emperor and could get away with almost anything he did. He could also create another hero license since he operated outside of the Commission's authority. This would allow him to hide much easier from his father and use different names to fight. Izuku asked to speak with the Emperor alone for a few minutes, and they all agreed. Izuku used one of the more rare quirks that allowed him to sense for electronics, and he ensured that there were no camera in the room or recording devices. The only camera was outside of the room that had a clear view of the room via the glass window. Izuku closed the blinds to ensure no one could see their lips. "My apologies for the secrecy. Only a handful of people know the truth of my quirk," Izuku stated, and the Emperor was confused since he read about the Immortal's quirk. He asked for a clarification, and Izuku provided one. "My quirk is listed as an enhanced copy. That is somewhat true, but also false. My quirk is an enhanced version of my father's quirk due to it mixing with my mother's quirk from what I've gathered. I can copy, take, give, and combine quirks as I wish. I didn't want to be used as a weapon by the government, and only the handful of heroes that worked with my uncle knew of my true quirk, and so does the president of the commission, but he has no plans of telling future presidents. However, we both agree that the Emperor should know since you are granting me such authority and power which will allow me to move so freely in the future when you are long gone," Izuku said as he bowed and apologized for the deceit. The Emperor was silent for a few moments before telling Izuku to rise and take a seat. "Thank you for trusting me with this information. I will ensure that I write nothing of it down and only pass the information via word of mouth to each emperor. This does make some plans easier. Are you able to take your father's quirks?" asked the Emperor. Izuku shook his head no and started to explain. "It's impossible for me. Our quirks are so similar that they hide from each other. We know he has a quirk, yet my quirk doesn't sense any in him. It is as if they cancel each other out. That is why my father always assumed I was quirkless since I never showed any visible quirks in front of him. It will also be how I hide over the years since I will change what my main visible quirk will be, as I will use the Shadow Guard authority to create a new hero license outside of my Shadow one to operate under so my father doesn't get any hints of me being alive," Izuku explained. The Emperor nodded his head, and they talked for a bit more before they came to an end and invited the others back into the room. They could only press forward against the chaotic times that are in front of them. Third POV. Roughly a year has passed since Izuku's death, and he's been hard at work learning everything and anything that he could from all of the combat instructors and other training instructors that the government provided him. Izuku was strengthening his overall abilities in anything he could, but he was also practicing his stealth and assassination techniques. His goal was to operate and become the ruler of the night for the most part. He would operate during the day sometimes, But his main focus would always be during the night since he didn't want people to get a visual on him all of the time. However, while Izuku was doing all of this training, the world was not calm and peaceful. Instead, it was chaotic, just as they predict. All for One had gained control in the year's time of almost all of the Quirk factions and was pushing forward in his plans. All for One had been spotted at a large meeting of top leaders of all of the Quirked groups, and they discovered the plans. All for One had aimed to take control of the government within the next half year. How was he going to do this? Simple, really. He was planning to lead a violent overtaking and occupy all of the main government buildings. He would also have his forces occupy military installations, which would reduce the capabilities of the government to respond with military forces. As such, the government started its protocols and started to evacuate anything important into the hidden hideouts. Izuku's main training was more or less finished in the past year as well, so he became activate again as Shadow to help throw All for One off of his game. You can say it worked as well, since Izuku could see the pure rage on his father's face when he saw someone wearing the same outfit and mask that Izuku himself wore. All for One went ballistic and ended up damaging his own base and some of his own men due to his rage. Izuku had infiltrated the base that they knew All for One was currently at, since it also houses some of the supplies that they were going to use for the overthrowing of the government. Izuku had gone with the goal of destroying as much as he could by setting some explosives, but he never got the chance to, since he was halfway into the base when All for One spotted him when he came around a corner. Now you might be asking, why doesn't Izuku just keep his quirk on that masks his presence all the time? Well, that quirk also requires him to hold his breath, which makes it good for short distances, but not long drawn-out fights. Izuku has to control his breathing so he doesn't make himself lightheaded and take deep breaths and drop the quirk before he turns it back on. However, All for One entered the hallway right after Izuku had dropped it to breathe. All for One was stunned and Izuku cursed himself and bolted, but All for One did Izuku's job for him as he activated some large wind blast quirk and ended up setting off all the bombs he had already set but couldn't link up. This caused the explosions to go off, but the wind blast also did a fair amount of damage to the base as well. All for One had tried to chase after Izuku, and Izuku just kept running from his father throughout the base, which All for One kept throwing attacks, which just resulted in even more damage. Soon though, Izuku escaped out of the base, since he knew it wasn't the right time to fight his father, since he was alone right now instead of a base filled with a large number of criminals. Izuku soon arrived back at his hideout and started a conference call with the Emperor, the Prime Minister, and the Commission's President. They asked for an update on how the mission went since he was back before he was scheduled to be. I ran into All for One, so I didn't get to finish planting the bombs, Izuku said, and they assumed it was a failure, but Izuku corrected it. I was correct in that wearing this outfit and mask would set my father off. He acted out of anger and attacked, which triggered the bombs to go off, destroying the portions they were set up in. I didn't get all bombs set, but at least half were set. Then he also chased me throughout the base a bit and kept attacking, which caused more damage. It's unknown of how much of their resources are lost, but they without a doubt lost some and received some injured people due to him, Izuku stated, and that made them all happy. Hopefully, it would buy them a bit more time on evacuating important documents and people into the hideouts. They were also gathering more of their forces and locations to push back against All for One. They were more or less resigned to losing official control of the country so that they could focus on the counterattack with their army. As they thought it happened, All for One took control of the country. However, it didn't happen as soon as he planned. Due to the attack that Izuku did and the damage, All for One caused his plans got delayed by about 4 months, which allowed the government even more time to gather their military force and private citizens that volunteered to join the forces. They also had the increasing numbers of heroes at their side as well. As such, the government was gathering a large force in one area and were planning to retake the capital and control of the government. It was scheduled to happen at the end of the year, which was in about 4 months. As such, Izuku took the opportunity of all the people being gathered together and was copying quirks left and right. He did find quite a few quirks that were interesting and some that were useful. He also found a quirk that would be really useful for him in the future. This quirk he dubbed Animorphs, since it would allow him to change his appearance to anyone he has seen before. This combined with all of his other quirks would be useful for him to hide for the rest of time, since he can't die. There were some other useful quirks that he found amongst the heroes, army, and civilians, while the rest he didn't have direct use for at the moment. Izuku was also happy that some quirkless people were heroes as well. They were using some tools and gear from the military in their fights to stand up against quirked users, but nonetheless, it was good to see people uniting. Izuku finished his rounds of copying quirks that he did every single day and decided to head into the bunker for the upcoming meeting. The time was getting closer and closer to the day that they would launch their assault on the capital and retake control of the nation and force All for One into hiding. The overall plan was to overwhelm All for One force and force him to retreat into the underworld. They would also arrest anyone they could and start implementing laws that would appease the opposing forces so that they had no reason to fight anymore, which would weaken All for One's power. As Izuku entered the room, he noticed someone. It was his uncle. Izuku tensed up at that and was glad he had used his Animorph's quirk that he gained a few days ago to change his appearance, or he would have just outed himself. His uncle looked at him and had an odd look on his face. He moved over to Izuku and started to talk. "I'm sorry, but have we met before? For some reason you feel familiar to me," asked Izuku's uncle, and Izuku just said that they haven't met before and he likely just has that type of face. Kenneth Shigaraki accepted the answer and decided to back off, but did give glances to Izuku every once in a while. Then Izuku noticed something: his uncle's quirk wasn't as bright as before. Instead, it appeared in someone else from the main hero group that his uncle ran with. Izuku was confused about how that happened and started to look into the quirk itself. Izuku doesn't have to take a quirk to get information on it, but it takes much longer to get the information without copying it. Izuku was shocked at what he saw. It was indeed his uncle's quirk. It had transferred by itself via DNA. It appears that the quirk that his uncle had before allowed it to transfer itself at his will. Izuku decided to talk to his uncle under the disguise of a quirk user with a quirk that allowed him to read other quirks. After the meeting came to an end, Izuku approached his uncle and the group with him. "Excuse me, sir?" Izuku called out, and his uncle turned around and saw it was Izuku from before, but they never introduced themselves. "My name is Keth, and I have a unique quirk that allows me to read information about other quirks. I read some interesting things about the quirk inside of you and another gentleman in your group. Could I talk to you two for a few moments in private?" Izuku asked, and his uncle agreed, and all three men walked into a private room. Izuku then explained what he read and understood of the quirk to his uncle, and his uncle's eyes widened at that information. "So it seems I did have a quirk after all before my brother All for One forced one onto me." "Interesting," Kenneth said. Izuku asked how he transferred it to his friend, since it only goes via DNA, and from what he can see is willing it to go. His uncle blushed hard, and so did the other man. After a few seconds, Izuku got the hint and started to cough because he choked on the air in his surprise. "I think I got the idea," Izuku said, and his uncle said it was a kiss and not anything else. However, he did explain that he had a desire that he wished it could be put to good use since his body was weak and couldn't hold much strength like his lover could. As such, that is how it met the requirements to be transferred. Izuku then explained that information to them, and they nodded their heads. Soon, they decided on a new name for the quirk, and his uncle spoke the name. "It will be the opposing force to All for One. It will be called One for All, and it will be passed down user to user to keep All for One at bay until one day we become strong enough to defeat him," Kenneth Shigaraki stated. Izuku nodded his head and filed this information away. He was glad that the second user of the quirk belonged to their side, and warned them to be careful of who they pass it to in the future and to be mindful of keeping it under warps. They agreed, and soon the conversation came to an end. Izuku was glad that there would be a new quirk that could directly oppose his father, since he didn't want to give away the knowledge of him having an enhanced version of All for One to his father. Soon Izuku arrived at his room and sat down to relax. The battle would happen soon, and it was only a matter of time now. Izuku had also planned to let Shadow die in this battle if they were able to push All for One out of power and regain control. He then would go under different hero names and act in the shadows while using his shadow hero name only once in a while when he really needed it. Izuku sighed as he went to sleep and just let the darkness consume him. The remaining days passed, and now it was time for the battle. Everyone was currently in a convoy of military trucks heading straight for the capital city of Tokyo, and as they got closer they were met with resistance from All for One force, but the military was able to push through them easily with the help of the heroes and Shadow. Kenneth was shocked to see the Shadow outfit and tried to get close to the individual, but they kept disappearing, which bugged him. It was just like how his nephew moved around. He would come back to it later, though. He promised himself that. After about half a day of pushing through the enemy lines, they arrived at the capital. It was there that they found All for One waiting on the steps of the National Assembly. He looked towards the incoming forces and saw his brother and smirked. He then pointed towards the government forces, and everyone charged at them. This turned into an all-out battle. Everyone was doing everything they could, and Kenneth Shigaraki jumped over everyone and went and fought his brother. "Why do you continue to oppose me, brother? We could join forces and rule it all," All for One said with anger in his voice. Kenneth just shook his head. "When you first started, you wanted better rights and peaceful means to help the Quirk people, but look at you now. You are on a path to become a tyrant, a cold-blooded ruler," Kenneth yelled as he clashed with his older brother. They continued to fight as Izuku made his way closer to the fight. Izuku knew his uncle was no match for his father due to the overwhelming strength he possessed, and Izuku was right. As he arrived on site, he saw his uncle get hit in the side, which resulted in him coughing out a lot of blood. Izuku charged at his father and forced him away from his uncle. The sight of Izuku's outfit enraged All for One once again, due to it being the same outfit as his son's. He changed his focus back onto Izuku, who brought him away from the main fighting area and deeper into his own forces. This resulted in massive damage to All for One's own men due to his actions. The pure sight of Izuku's outfit made All for One that enraged. He was so enraged that he didn't notice that his forces were losing, that they were being pushed back. However, by the time he did notice, it was too late. His men's morale had shattered, and they were all running or being detained. All for One turned back around at Izuku and threw insults and powered up a more destructive move where he slammed it into Izuku and into a building, causing it to explode. All for One at that point assumed that the man he just hit would be dead due to the explosion, and he decided to pull back. Even though All for One was strong, he was not strong enough to take on all of the government forces by himself. He would need far more time to gain a lot of quirks to do that. At that moment, he decided to find quirks that would extend his life and his healing abilities, so he would be able to make this a war of attraction instead of decisive victories. With All for One gone, Izuku came out of the rumble on another side of the building and used his quirk to change his appearance into one of the government soldiers and used it to get back to where his uncle was at. He also used presence concealment, so no other soldiers stopped him. He figured out that his uncle was in a medical tent being taken care of. He also found the heroes that his uncle and he always worked with. Izuku walked up to his uncle's lover and asked him how Kenneth Shigaraki was, and Izuku's heart broke at the news. He wasn't going to make it. They would be allowed within the tent any second to say final goodbyes. Izuku stayed around since he wanted to talk to his uncle one more time. There was also the fact that Izuku planned to reveal himself to his uncle and the now second user. The fact that One for All was around now changed some of his plans on staying away from them. They were all allowed in the tent, and the people were confused about why the soldier went in. After a few minutes, Kenneth asked who Izuku was. Izuku asked for everyone else to step out except for the second user, and Kenneth had them leave since they already said their goodbyes. Izuku then changed his appearance back to his actual appearance. This caused them to go silent. "Hey, uncle." "Surprise," Izuku said as he waved his hand. They asked him how he was alive, and Izuku explained what he knew and how it happened. "I'm planning to stay in the shadows. I don't want Dad knowing I'm alive anytime soon. I'm thinking this will turn into the long game of attraction, and I plan to help guide the future users of One for All from the shadows," Izuku stated, and they were happy that the future users would have some help since they both understood as well that this would be a long war since they didn't have the strength to defeat him right now. The government would also need to stabilize as well before they could really go after him either. When you tell the new users about One for All, tell them about a hidden guide that will help them from time to time. However, I don't want my name, face, or connection to All for One known. I will just be acting in support in the shadows as I gain strength as well and counter Father's operations throughout the nation and world since I doubt he will stay local the entire time," Izuku stated. They understood his request since Izuku would be living for all eternity as far as they knew. Izuku deserved to enjoy his peace when he doesn't need to fight since this was going to be a war for centuries, and it wouldn't be fair to ask him to fight 24/7. He would also help the users without really approaching them by providing them resources anonymously and help whenever he finds them in trouble. Soon, Izuku changed his appearance again, and the others were allowed back in. After about 10 more minutes, Kenneth Shigaraki succumbed to his wounds and passed away. Izuku waited a bit longer before he got up and left. The second user followed him and provided a cell phone number that he could be reached at. Izuku did the same and said it was a burner phone that he will keep with him and that he should text the name of the third user whenever he passes it on, so if Izuku wasn't near, he would be able to keep track of them. This was how All for One short rule over Japan came to an end, and he was forced into the shadows where he would start a criminal empire to rule the underworld for centuries. Real name: Izuku Midoriya. Alice. Shadow. Occupations: Underground Hero Shadow and Leader of Shadow Guard. Known quirks: Color change. Allows the user to change their eye and hair color at their will. This quirk was combined from two individual quirks that Izuku had found that was called Eye Changer and Hair Changer. Hair growth. This allows the user to grow their individual hair across their body. It does not allow him to change the hairstyle, but that can be done via other products. It doesn't allow them to shorten either and only grow it. Animorphs. This provides the user the ability to change their appearance into anyone they have seen before. As such, Izuku uses this to change his overall appearance, and then use the other appearance-changing quirks to make changes in eye or hair color so that he isn't mistaken for that said individual. He uses this to hide over the centuries since his main body is stuck at the age of 28 of when he died. This doesn't mean he can't change his body, it just won't grow, as people do when they grow older. Presence concealment. The user must hold their breath to conceal their presence. Breathing undoes the quirk. As such, training in holding the breath allows the quirk to last longer. Natural enchantment. This quirk provides the user a doubling effect of their natural abilities. As such, the faster they can move without the quirk, they will gain double that while the quirk is activated. Double their natural strength, speed, agility, and so on. Enhanced vision. This quirk allows the user to have perfect eyesight and can pick up smaller details when they are actively looking for something. Recall. This allows someone to recall any memory that they have ever had.